So today I will start your SAML authentication. So let's go here. So I have go through with the SAML. What is SAML actually? So SAML stand for Security Assertion Markup Language. This is the definition of your SAML. SAML is an open standard that encodes the text into machine language and enable the exchange of identities information. What SAML will do? It will process your request and replies by using the XML encoded messages. So in a backend, it use the XML language. SAML, it is a security assertion markup language. It is commonly used for the single sign-on, guys. Now we have to look for what is single sign-on. So we will see in details what is single sign-on. SAML is widely adopted language. Security assertion markup language is used by the SaaS applications to eliminate the multiple user logons. What it will do? It will use the concept of single sign-on. So generally we use this SAML majorly for our SaaS applications or maybe our VPN users. SaaS application means if I take example of Google, right? In Google have their services like Gmail for email purpose. We have a Google Drive, then Google Docs, Google Sheet, right? Multiple applications are there. And if you are using SAML, you just need to authenticate in one of them. Just log in into the Google or log into the Gmail, you will get the access of Google Drive, you will get the access of Google Sheets, and you will get the access of Google Docs. So means same with the Office 365 applications. If you will log in into your email, then you don't need to log in into other Office 365 applications. Why? Because all they are using SSO. Single sign-on means just sign once with one of the application and it will allow the access of all the remaining application. Now, so what it will do? It will eliminate the multiple user logon against the SaaS applications. In Palo Alto, basically, Palo Alto is also support the XML for HTTP based authentication. So we can authenticate our admin users, or whenever we are logging into our Palo Alto admin UI or web UI, we have to enter the username and password. That time we can use here, instead of the local database or our LDAP or our radius, what we can use the SAML identity provider. I will discuss what is identity provider, don't worry. We can use SAML for that as well. We can use the SAML for captive portal authentication. We can use the SAML for GP portal authentication. We can use SAML for the globalprotect gateway authentication, and we can also use SAML for clientless VPN. Because this particular tutorial or video I'm creating with regards to the Palo Alto, so I will go specific with the Palo Alto, guys. Now, what is SSO? You have to understand SSO. SSO stands for single sign-on. SSO is a session or a user authentication service that permits a users to use one set of login credential. For example, a name and password. You can use just one set of authentication to access multiple applications, as I have mentioned. SSO is an authentication scheme where users can securely authenticate and gain the access to the multiple applications and website by only logging in with a single username and password. So let me give you one example here. Let's suppose in your organization you have a multiple applications. If I'll go here, sorry, just minimize it. So if you will see this example here, I am having here customers, partners, and I am just having here one single sign-on provider. Let's suppose I'm taking here Okta. Okta is a provider or a cloud-based authentication provider, and let's suppose these are the applications I'm having here: Gmail, then Salesforce, Slack, and many more. And if these users, they want to authenticate their self against all of them, in traditional date, what used to happen, we used to create a separate username and password for Gmail, separate username and password for Salesforce, separate username and password for Slack, and separate username and password for other application. But now what we used to do, with the help of this Okta, or with the help of single sign-on mechanism, what we can do, we just need to integrate these application with the provider, with the single sign-on provider, and users, they will just authenticate their self against this provider, and they will get the access of all these applications. Now they just need to maintain one username and password, that's it. So that's the benefit when we have a SSO. If I'll take example of here, so in this example, if you will see, there is a one user, and this is the single sign-on provider. So let's suppose I'm using here Okta. You can also use Kerberos if you want. Then these are the three websites. So just log in against this single sign-on. What it will do, it will provide you some kind of assertion. It will provide you the assertion, or we can say token, or we can say cookie. After that, you can use this particular SAML assertion to authenticate yourself against all these websites. It's a similar thing like when we visit into a bedding, right? So in bedding, or let's suppose we are visiting to any building which is highly secure, which have multiple departments. Let's suppose these are the multiple departments, and all these departments, they are having their security guards, and these security guards is checking everyone. Let's suppose now you are first entering to this. So here they will check yourself. When you will go into further, they will check again here. When you go further, they will check again here. And when you go further, they will check again here, right? But how they can improve that particular process? What they can do, whenever you are entering into any of the building, what if they will give you some kind of token? And after that, whenever you are going into another department or another building, just use that token, and that token will validate yourself. That's how basically your SSO works, on the basis of token, or in case of SAML, on the basis of SAML assertion. It will authenticate you when you are accessing multiple websites. Now, how SSO works basically? So this is the user machine. What we used to do, we will, whenever we will try to access any website, so what we will redirect towards the SSO login page, where we have to enter our username and password. So we have entered our credentials. Now this website, it reaches to the SSO, send credentials to the SSO solution. Now this solution, it, let's suppose this SSO is also having some kind of database, right? Maybe they are having their Active Directory or Radius, some kind of database they need where they can store your credentials, right? So now this SSO, it will authenticate yourself again that database, and after that, what, pass the authentication data, means it will pass that particular data, and user get the access. This is how your SSO works. Don't worry, this is not a working of SAML, guys, but SAML is also works in a similar way. If I'll take example of SAML, before going into the how it works, you have to understand what is service provider, what is identity provider, what is end user machine, everything you have to understand. Okay, so don't worry, we will go one by one. So Without SSO solution, the website maintains a database of login credentials, username, and password. Each time the user log into the website, checks the user credential against its database and authenticate the users, right? With the SSO solution, the website does not store login credential in its database. And instead of SSO makes use of a shared cluster of authentication servers, where users are only required to enter their login credential once, and after that once for the authentication. With this feature of one login and multiple access, it is crucial to protect login credential in a SSO system, right? So we have to only think about the security into the SSO system or SSO user database server like Active Directory or Active Directory, right? Hence, it is highly recommended to integrate SSO with other strong authentication means such as a smart token or a one-time password to achieve the multi-factor authentication. So we always use, guys, SSO with the multi-factor authentication. Just remember how SSO works. Users enter the login credential on the website. The website checks to see if the user has already been authenticated by the SSO solution. And how that website will check, it will check on the basis of previous token, if there is any. If so, the SSO solution would give the user access to the website. Otherwise, it presents the user with the SSO solution for the login. The user enters username and password on the SSO solution. The user's login credential are sent to the SSO solution. The SSO solution seeks authentication from the identity provider, such as an Active Directory, to verify the user's identity. Now, when we will put the user credentials, now these user credentials will be validated against the SSO user database, which is Active Directory, maybe. And the identity provider sends the verification to the SSO. Don't worry what is identity provider, we will explain everything. Don't worry on that. Upon successful login with the SSO, the website passes the authentication data in the form of tokens as a part of verification that the user is authenticated. As a user navigates to a different application or a website. Now let's discuss the SAML component. So to explain this SAML component, what I will do, I'll go here to make some space. And let's discuss the SAML component. SAML component. So in SAML component, basically, the first component is your service provider. So what I will do, if I draw one diagram, this is the user machine. Then let's suppose here I am having Palo Alto firewall. On this Palo Alto firewall, I am running globalprotect portal and gateway services. And all they are having a connectivity with the internet, guys, just remember. And here I am having my SSO provider. On the best way, I am having my IDP, which is Okta in my case. We can have a multiple IDP, but I'm just going with the Okta. This is the setup I'm having here. Now, let's understand what is service provider. So, if you will go with this kind of setup where I'm having user, Palo Alto firewall, and SSO. So when who is basically providing the services here? If you will see, Palo Alto firewall, he is offering the portal and gateway services, right? So your Palo Alto firewall become the service provider here. This is my service provider. This Palo Alto portal and gateway, this is my service provider in our case. What is the definition? It is the entity providing the service. Like our Palo Alto firewall, he is offering the remote access VPN services or by using the GP or global protect, right? Typically in the form of an application. If I'll take a normal example of SaaS application, so let's suppose we have protected our Office 365, or let's say we have protected our Outlook. Then this Outlook, it become the service provider because we are trying to access the Outlook right here. So what is service provider now? Endpoint initiating the SAML transaction is your service provider. In our case, our global protect portal, our PanOS GUI, and our captive portal, they become the service provider, guys. Just remember, they become the service provider. Now you have to understand what is identity provider. So provider of the single sign-on solution means your ping ID, one login, Okta, and Cisco Duo. These are the popular vendors who is basically offering the single sign-on services. So means according to our diagram here, if you will see here, I am having Okta or maybe Duo or maybe one login or maybe ping ID, right? This become the identity provider. So who is identity provider? A provider of single sign-on services. Now we will store our all the user database against or into this particular provider, and they will authenticate ourselves. They will authenticate this user. Now whenever we will connect with the GP portal or gateway, we have to enter the username and password. Now this username and password will be validated by this service provider or identity. Sorry, these credentials is validated by the identity provider or single sign-on provider. Go here. It is the entity providing the identities, including the ability to authenticate a user. The identity provider typically also contain the user profile, additional information about the user such as first name, last name, job code, phone number, address, etc. So we generally have these kind of information available into our identity provider. So like we can say your AD, it is also identity provider. We can think AD as identity provider, but AD is a on-prem based. It is not a cloud-based solution. Why? These become very popular. Ping ID, one login, Okta, because they are the cloud-based applications. And nowadays people are working from home, right? So if you want to secure the communication which is happening between your system and with the SaaS application, you have to go by these particular providers only. Okay, now you have to understand what is SAML request and SAML response. So this SAML request and response, these are the XML encoded messages between the service provider and identity provider. SAML request, also known as a authentication request, is generated by the service provider to request an authentication. SAML response is generated by the identity provider. It contains the SAML assertion of the authenticated users. In addition, a SAML response may contain additional information such as user profile information and groups, role details, depending on what the service provider can support. So let's have a look on this SAML request and response. So if I'll go here, if I'll click on auth request, so you have to go to into samltool.com. You will get the example and authentication request, and your authentication request looks like this, where See, this is your authentication request. This is the sample authentication request, guys. It is having the ID. This is the ID. This is the SAML version. It is using version 2.0. This is the provider name. So this is the identity provider. Issue instant. This is the time when that request is generated. This is the destination or the URL of your identity provider. Then we have a protocol binding. This is the HTTP post request. SSN consumer service URL. This is the URL of your SSN consumer. Don't worry, we will discuss each and everything in details in a coming lecture or now. So this is your SAML request format. I have basically already taken few logs on the Palo Alto firewall. Don't worry, I will take these logs again. And if you will see here, SAML SSO request payload, this is the actual payload. This is the auth daemon log file, and you will see it is having the assertion consumer service URL. This is the URL of my Palo Alto firewall global protect portal. This is the destination. This is the URL of my service provider. This is my service provider URL, Okta. And this is the ID. This is the time when that request is generated. Then protocol binding. So you have seen here, this content is available into your SAML request. Now, go back here, go into response. And if you have seen the SAML request and response, these are the XML encoded messages, guys. These are the XML encoded messages. These messages will be sent between service provider and identity provider. Don't worry how it works. We will see the working as well. Don't worry. Now, SAML response. It is generated by the identity provider. Means SAML response is always generated by the identity provider. It contains the SAML assertion of the authenticated user. So here you will get the SAML assertion. This SAML assertion we use for the authentication purpose, guys. A SAML response may contain additional information like user profile information, group roles, all these details are there. If you go into that website, if you will see, this is the SAML response. So you have a SAML version. Then we have a identity or ID. Then issue instant ID. This is the issue instance where and what time this response is generated. Then we have a destination of our service provider. In our case, you will see the destination of global protect. And in response to this ID is very important. This ID is equals to this ID. And when I will explain this auth ID, this ID equals to that same ID. That should be matched. So don't worry, we will see in details because I will decode these request messages. Don't worry. Then here you will see some SAML assertion. SAML assertion start here. SAML subject. Here you will get the subject details. Name ID. So everything you will get here. Subject information method. Then SAML condition you will get here. Then authentication statement you will get in the response page where we have a password based authentications and all, right? Then you have some attribute information for SAML, like where you will get the name, format, email address, all that detail. SAML response with the signed assertion. So you will see generally you will see this particular response, this type of response in case of global protect. where you will see the digital signature algorithm. Like you will get the SAML assertion, then signed information. You will get the digital signature details, your certificate details, everything you will get here. So we have a different types of SAML request and response. Don't worry, we will verify all of them one by one. Now what I will do, let me just explain you the working, how this particular thing works. And after that, I will move towards the other part of it, actually, how this SAML works. So let's see the SAML operation. So I will take help of this particular. So I will take the help of this image here. And in this image, if you have seen, I'm having my identity provider. Let's take an example. This is Okta is identity provider here. Then we are having end user browser, and this is your user machine. And this is the service provider. Let's suppose this is my Palo Alto firewall, who is serving the request for. So what I can mention here, let's go with the portal. Let's suppose we are accessing the portal for clientless solution, clientless VPN solution. Don't worry. Okay. Now what will happen? Now end user access the service provider from the browser, right? So what this machine, on this machine, what he has done, he has just opened one request. He has just opened the HTTPS request just for accessing the portal.lab.local. This is the URL of my portal on my Palo Alto firewall. Now this request reaches to the service provider. Now what this service provider do? Now, because in this service provider, when we do the configuration, we have to define the URL, or we generally define the URL, or we can say we define the details of our identity provider like Okta. So what he will send? Now service provider, he will send the HTTP redirect with the code 302 towards your identity provider. SAML request. So what he's sending the SAML request here. And if I'll open the Palo Alto log file, you will see this destination. It will redirect the request to this destination. This destination. Okay. So don't be confused. Now, this request received by the browser, it's a redirect request. So now our browser, he will basically forward this request towards the identity provider. Now what they will do? And also, whenever this service provider, he will forward this request, what? He has also done some modification where we have to also enter our username and password. So means identify the or authenticate the user, means in this request which is initiated by this browser towards this identity provider, it is also having the username and password details. Now this username and password details, it's not happen like that. They will first go with the SSL handshake and everything, because all the communication which is happening between this browser and this identity provider, it is secure by HTTPS. So everything is happens over the SSL. Okay, they will do the SSL handshake and everything. Don't worry, we will see all these messages as well. And if possible, I will try to also decrypt these messages. Don't worry, I will take the help of Voice Shark and I will decrypt these messages. Now this request reaches to this identity provider. Now this identity provider, it will validate the username and password, which is passed by the user from this machine. And what it will do, it will validate it, and what it will generate the SAML assertion. It will generate the SAML assertion, and it will just send back the SAML response. So this is known as SAML request. This is also SAML request. Now this is known as SAML response. Now this SAML response looks like this. It's a SAML response. So you will see this kind of messages there. Now I'll go into my Palo Alto firewall. Let me just see what we can have for the SAML response. Auth success for the response. Now if you will see, so SSO create a SAML request. Now we have to look for the SAML response. So see, there's a lots of messages. This is the request payload. Response. Signature validation. So because he has start processing the response, you will not able to see the response message over there in detail. Don't worry. But you will get the same response. You will get the similar response with the SAML assertion, digital certificate, and everything to the browser of your machine. Now this machine, what it will send this particular, it will forward that request. So this is also a HTTP redirect request. Just remember on 302. Now this request reaches to the service provider. Now service provider validate that particular assertion, and when it will complete the validation, you will get this message: successful signature verification. It will validate the signatures. It will validate the XML signatures, guys. Don't worry. Okay. Now, if user is authenticated, service provider send the security context to the browser and request resource from the SP, and SP responds with the request resource. And like that, basically, they will complete the whole exchange process, or this is how your SAML works. Now, in this SAML, you also need to understand few other terminology. Don't worry, I will come here later. What is the meaning of all these things? Now let's discuss the. I will come to here. Let me just give you the definition only. Service provider initiated. What is the meaning of this one? Service provider initiated or SP initiated. So which means sign in, describe the SAML sign in flow when initiated by the service provider. So means if you will see SP initiated, which means this is the SAML request which is initiated by the service provider. Like in our case, our globalprotect, right? GP, he has started the SAML process, right? He has created the SAML request. So you will see the SP initiated means this request is always initiated by the service provider. This is typically triggered when the end user tries to access a resource or sign in directly on a service provider site, such as when the browser tries to access a protected resource on the service provider site. Let me explain this then. Identity provider initiated. So this is the request which is initiated by the identity provider. So a SAML sign-in flow initiated by the identity provider, and instead of SAML flow being triggered by a redirection from the service provider, in this flow identity provider initiate a SAML response that is redirected to the service provider to assert the user identity. What's that exactly? So what I can do, I have put this URL here. Also check out this URL. But let me explain here. So what happens basically, let's suppose this is a user, this is internet, this is service provider, and this is your identity provider like Okta. Service provider, let's take example of, we can say any everything like Office 365. Then this is a service provider one. Then we have another service provider like service provider 2. And let's say this is Google. This is Google services. Okay. They all have a connectivity like that with the internet. Everyone has a connectivity with the internet. So when I say service provider initiated, service provider initiated means this user, he will access the service provider first. Now this service provider, this is the first request. Now this service provider, he will generate the XML request and he will send the HTTP redirect by using 302 code towards IDP. Now this user, he will contact the IDP. This is the third one. IDP validate the users and it will issue the, it will send SAML response here with the SAML assertion. Now this user, he will basically forward the SAML assertion here. This is your fourth transaction. This is fifth transaction. Now this SP, he will validate that particular SAML assertion and he will basically allow the access. Now what happens? So if you will see, this request is initiated by the service provider, right? That's why this is known as SP initiated. And SP initiated, your request is initiated by the service provider. Just remember. Now let's discuss in another way. Let's make some space. Okay, cool. Now let me just complete this diagram first. Now this time we are discussing IDP initiated. What is the meaning of IDP initiated? So in IDP initiated, what happens? This user, he will directly send the request to your IDP. It will directly send the authentication request to IDP. The username and password. Now this IDP process the username and password. So this is known as like SAML request and this is known as SAML response. Now this SAML response, because this request is initiated by this user, then SAML response, he will get the SAML assertion. Now he will use this SAML assertions to authenticate against these particular service providers. This is IDP initiated, means we are directly communicating with the identity provider like Okta. So that is known as IDP initiated. Now these are the two diagrams which will explain this part. What is you will see IDP initiated. So in that case, what I'm having the same component end user. This is my identity provider and this is my service provider. So now user and user access the SAML IDP portal directly. And the IDP authenticate the user, identify and authenticate the user. IDP generate the SAML assertion and send back to the browser. Means he will authenticate and now he will basically also provide the SAML assertion in a SAML response. So they say your SAML response. Now browser release the SAML assertion back to the service provider. Now if user is authenticated, service provider sends security context to the browser, request the resource from the SP. Now this IDP he will check with the browser that particular browser is having the SAML assertion or not, that token or cookie, and it will basically authenticate and it will allow the access. That's how your IDP initiated works. Now this is your service provider initiated, where it's a normal flow. User access the service provider application, SP generate the SAML request. So guys, in IDP initiated, you will sometime you will not able to see the SAML XML request message. That request message you will not able to see in IDP initiated flow. Just remember, okay? Because there is no SAML request, you will only see the SAML response coming from the IDP. Now, this service provider, he will validate the details. He will just send the redirect message, right, towards your identity provider. Now that request go to your identity provider, user name and password validation happens, and it will provide you the SAML assertion. And what it will do in this SAML assertion, it will also, and this SAML assertion basically is also having the, it's a SAML response basically with the digital certificates and other values, other user attribute values. Now browser relays that SAML assertion back to the service provider. So guys, now just tell me, see, on this browser we are accessing here https av1.workday.com, right? This is the URL we are trying to access. Now SP generate the SAML request, include the relay state, guys. So now we have to also understand what is relay states. So in relay states, when we access the, let's suppose in our case, when we try to access the portal, right? So this is the URL of our portal, https portal.lab.local, right? So it will basically put this particular URL as a relay state here. Now service provider redirect this SAML authentication request back to end users with the relay state. Now browser relays, so browsers just forward the same request. This request, this is the XML request towards the identity provider. Now identity provider will validate the username and password against the directory or the user database. Now your identity provider, what it will do, it will generate the SAML response, and also it will basically put the, it will use this particular relay state value, and it will forward that request towards the browser and your browser. And now this relay value, it is having the HTTP redirect towards portal.lab.local in our case. And in this case, they are basically, he's putting that particular URL, right? So that's how my browser know this is the URL he needs to basically relay that particular SAML response. Now SAML response reaches to the service provider, and now service provider validate the things. So that's how your relay state help you in relaying the relaying the backend, we can say that relaying the actual HTTP request towards the service provider. That's how. If you will see same thing, so I put these two example here, you can refer them. SAML request we have already seen, so don't worry. Now let's go here. SP initiated and IDP initiated not supported by all the applications. Generally, guys, you will see this IDP initiated or SP initiated not supported by all the application. Global Protect supports SP initiated, service provider initiated. Okay. What is SAML assertion? Assertion or SAML assertion is issues as a proof of an authentication event with the IDP. Means this particular assertion proves to your SP, to your service provider, that that user is successfully authenticated against your IDP. Okay. What is XML signature? XML signatures are digital signatures designed for use in XML transactions. So if you want to use XML transactions securely, we have a digital signatures here. A fundamental feature of your XML signature is the ability to sign only a specific portion of the XML tree or XML document. What it will do? It will sign the specific portion of your XML document. It don't need to authenticate. Sign means it will just create a digest, or it will create the MD5 or whatever hash digest. This digest basically is known as a signature. They will create this digest to just secure the communication. Okay. Now, what is assertion consumer service? It is the client who process the SAML response coming from the IDP. So this SAML consumer service, which means whenever, in our case, basically, whenever this client machine, because this is your client here, right? He will receive the SAML assertion into the browser. It will store that value in the browser, right? So this become your SAML assertion consumer. It is consuming that particular service. What is attributes? When data written from the IDP to the SP, when we receive a SAML response from the IDP towards the SP, which are, so that response, it is having your username, groups, phone numbers, email, role, serial number, display name, given name. All these details you will see in your SAML response. If you want to check here, you will get all the details here. I'll go here. I have also captured few of the packet. So this SAML metadata, all are the metadata, I think. I have lost them maybe somewhere. Do not an issue, we will see these details because I will, yeah, I can see I'm having the capture from my last class actually. So if you will see, this is the SAML request basic, we can say. It is having all these details. It is having the issuer name. It is having the, this is the issuer name. It is having the certificate. So you will see it is having all the certificates and everything. And this is the content of your SAML request. Now, this is your SAML response base, we can say. It is having certificates, signature value, then your certificate, the entire certificate. These are the, this is your assertion IDs and other details. This is the issuer. These are the signature values. This is the value. This is the digest value, right? This is the certificate, right? You have all the details here. Now you will see somewhere your attributes. This is the SAML subject details, right? Username is hemu@sianets.com. So everything you will get here. These are the logs from my yesterday session. Cool. Go back here. Relay agent we have seen. It will tells the IDP where was the user wants to go before the authentication. Means it will redirect towards the actual URL which we are trying to access in our first transaction. So IDP redirect the user to the SP. SAML trust. What is SAML trust? So generally what happens? How we can build the trust between our identity? How we will build the trust between these components, between your service provider and gateway, right? So what we will use certificates basically for validation purpose. Like when we are trying to access any SSL website, they will first go with the TCP three-way handshake, then SSL handshake, right? This SSL handshake build the trust, but that time we just only authenticate the server. But in our case, we will authenticate the client as well. Means service provider as well against the IDP, and we will authenticate IDP against your service provider. Now, so this is known as SAML trust. Now you have to understand metadata. What is metadata? So metadata, it allows self configuration. It is a XML config file. So I'm having one of the metadata file. Let me just open this metadata file for you. Let me just open this one as well. Let me just open that one as well. Let me just increase the size so you can able to see it properly. Let's increase here as well, and let's increase here as well. Yeah, this is the metadata. So this metadata I have downloaded from the IDP, from the Okta. It is having your entity ID. So generally in metadata you have a few components, basic we can say. This metadata for we are using SAML 2.0 entity ID. So this is the URL we can say of your service provider. So you will get this entity ID. Entity ID where you will get the URL of your IDP. Then it is having the signing certificate. The certificate who will sign the client request or the XML request which is initiated by the client machine, or the certificate who authenticate the client against your Okta, against your IDP. So you will get this particular certificate. This is the certificate. Don't worry, I will explain the configuration so you will get whole idea. Now, so generally this is the certificate from the IDP side. It's a DigiCert certificate in X509 format. Okay, because this is the metadata file from the this is the metadata file I have downloaded from the SP, from the service provider, or for the service provider. And this I have downloaded from the Okta portal. It is having some other details, SAML binding details it is having. So these are the URLs, location. So this is the location, means this is the actual URL of my Okta account. If I'll go here, this is the URL of my Okta account. This is my Okta account, and here you will get the location of my Okta account. Then, so single logout service, single logout service. Here you will get the URL of my, this is the same URL, I think. Yeah, it's the same URL. Then single sign-on service binding, because we are also using, whenever users sign out, they will do the proper, they will close the connection properly. Okay, so this is your metadata file. Now, in this metadata file, you have a signing certificate, endpoint, single sign-on service or location. You will get the endpoint location as well. In SP, endpoint call as ACS. In IDP, endpoint call as SSO. So if I'll go here, if I'll search with this, and if I'll go into one of the sample file, because this file, it is having the information of metadata file from the IDP and from IDP and from the SP both. You will see this is the URL of your assertion consumer service. What is this? ACS, assertion consumer service. This is ACS. And this assertion in SP endpoint, this endpoint call as a ACS, which is assertion consumer service, means this particular metadata is represented the information of your service provider. Just remember. And if you go into this file, single sign on. So if you go here, if I'll go with the location, and if you will see this location, it will represent the metadata file. If you have this thing, which means this is the metadata file from the IDP. So generally you will see both the things actually. If I'll go into the next, so this is something else. Assertion consumer service, assertion consumer service, single logout service. If you will get this one, which means this is for your, this represent this metadata file also having information of your identity provider. This is how we will basically look the information into your provider. SSO descriptors, we can identify the service provider and IDP meta data file. So just go search with the SSO descriptor. Go here. So you will get all the location details and other things. Now you will see SPSSO descriptor, which means from here you will get, this is the information of your service provider. So if I'll go on top, SPSSO descriptor means from here your service provider information is start. So we just have a SPSSO descriptor. Just so only the SPSSO descriptor. If I'll go here, if I'll search, so this is IDP SSO descriptor, means this is the file from the identity provider. So you will like that, you can basically check the things. So you will get this SSO descriptor as well, which you can also use as for identifying these particular files. Okay, cool. So this is the thing which I want to basically cover with regards to the SAML theoretical portion. Now what we will do? Now I will basically start your Palo Alto configuration with regards to the SAML.